The story of Killdozer is a well-remembered one. I mean, how often really does a homemade tank come along? This infamous tale of disputes, rivalries, explosive revenge, and destroyed livelihoods was either the final straw for a selfish madman or the inevitable breaking of an unfortunate business owner who ran out of hope. Marvin Heemeyer. Marvin Heemeyer was an upstanding citizen and a former Air Force engineer. He was an affluent business owner contributing to his local community through a successful muffler shop in Granby, Colorado. But every man has his limits. On June 4th, 2004, he drove a heavily modified Komatsu bulldozer literally through the town that wronged him, causing millions in damage from a homemade tank he had built himself. He first set foot in the town on a holiday in the early 1990s and loved it so much that he decided to build a life there. He purchased a small property with some land that was being sold at auction. At the property auction in 1991, Marvin outbid the man who would become his arch nemesis in the coming years, Killdozer, with a $42,000 bid that proved too rich for him. Marvin's plan was to sell the land to a third party, but they pulled out at the last minute, leaving him with the land after all. He made the best of it though and decided to clean up the old lot and build up a business. Very quickly, his plans were halted when he tried to get water and sewage hooked up. Lo and behold, the closest line was underneath his rival's land, right next door. Knowing winning over Dochev was a lost cause, he quickly made his own arrangements, putting in a makeshift septic tank system. Following a soured further attempt to sell the land to Dochev, accusations of poor maintenance and fines were being hurled at Heemeyer from local authorities, with his rival being the likely whistleblower. Persistent issues. Quoted as being a likable, friendly, and helpful person, Marvin was halted constantly by these hiccups instigated by local government who were challenging his right to build up his business, mostly out of apparent spite in the community. Killdozer had bought the neighboring land, still bitter about the loss at the auction. He quickly began building a cement factory on the lot. These plans would result in Heemeyer being unable to have reasonable access to his own business. Infuriated and almost powerless, he bought a bulldozer and began producing a pathway to the property himself out of his own pocket. He showed his good intentions and that he only wanted to be able to access his livelihood by doing the work himself. But even this was stopped by the indifferent, unreasonable powers that be, and in the early stages, it was swiftly halted by the town. Eventually though, rather than continue to fight while losing every step of the way until he had nothing left, Marvin decided to take matters into his own hands. He hatched a plan to get his own back on the local government, rival businesses, and the local paper that had tarnished his name in the tight-knit community. He decided to repurpose the bulldozer he bought, setting into motion a plan that would have a lasting impact on the town. Over a year and a half, he labored day and night on building a fully armored, controllable fortress with internal ventilation, cement, and steel bulkheads, 3 feet thick, making it bulletproof, and installing a firing platform for the use of weapons. He fashioned the contraption into a monstrous, entirely homemade tank. During this time, he hid himself away with only sparing visits from friends on the property stopping the work. Isolated in a very dark place, with little in the way of support, perhaps due to his lack of family or people turning a blind eye, Marvin stewed on his rivalries, hindrances, and revenge until he had convinced himself, due to the lack of discovery of what he was doing, that God himself intended for this day of reckoning to go ahead without issue. During their visits to the site, people were seemingly blind to the work being done in the bulldozer, with Marvin doing very little to hide his project, something in his audio recordings Marvin would refer to as divine intervention, with their vision being clouded. He explained how God didn't allow them to see it even though it was in the same room.
So these guys come in, oh wow, what's this? This is the dozer. Oh, okay. I believe that I'm doing the right thing. I don't think God would have let me get this far if it was the wrong thing.
This man clearly needed help. Still though, during this time, the property he'd built his muffler business on was sold successfully to an outsider. By now though, he was blind to the opportunity for a new start and more concerned with exacting revenge. The money went into building the Killdozer instead. The event itself. On June 4th, 2004, Marvin had all his plans in place, so he set about bringing about a cost to those who had wronged him in Granby over the years. He drove the Killdozer through the wall of his own property and headed straight towards his neighbor's concrete plant. He drove through its walls, inflicting catastrophic damage to the property. En route into town after seeing the destruction, Cody Dotcheff, his arch nemesis, jumped in a front loader to intercept and stop Heemeyer himself. Making use of his homemade firing platform, Marvin fired 50 caliber rounds at some propane tanks, narrowly missing his target before shoving Dotcheff's vehicle aside and continuing deeper into the town. It had become difficult to determine if he fired at Cody, with conflicting reports amassing over time. Regardless, with no casualties to his name, his next target was the town hall, the seat of the government that he had fought against for years and had destroyed his livelihood. He proceeded to inflict unbelievable damage to it. Authorities were hot on Marvin's tail by this point. They began to try to intercept him. They fired on his tank with shotguns, small arms, and even climbed aboard to try and find a way to stop it. But the outer shell was impenetrable, so it soldiered on. While pushing through various businesses in the town, destroying everything in his path, Marvin used custom-built bulletproof cameras to navigate flawlessly. They quickly became a target for police, but even those proved too strong for the forces. The local governor reportedly got so desperate, he asked the National Guard to deploy an Apache helicopter equipped with Hellfire missiles and a small team of explosive experts to destroy Heemeyer's invention. He had caused over $7 million in damages to the concrete plant, police station, and local businesses by the time he reached the newspaper's office, which had defaced him while his court cases were underway. He began brutally rolling through the structure's integrals shortly after he was blocked into a straight route by authorities. Unfortunately for Marvin, as he plowed forward, the radiator would fall and the right side tracks of the Killdozer fell through to the basement of the newspaper office. This halted him dead in his tracks. Trapped as authorities closed in, a single gunshot was heard. Marvin Heemeyer had ended his own life, no doubt seeing a lifetime of prison before him. Only he was hurt, but the town was in ruins. To the authorities, relieved, Marvin's rampage was over, and they began to work on picking up the pieces. It took them over 8 hours to cut into the cabin that Marvin operated the machine from, where they found his body. Thanks to the installed ventilation and lack of an exit, it was clear Marvin never intended to leave the Killdozer. Amazingly, no innocents were hurt during the destruction. However, it's believed by the majority that he never intended to directly cause harm to people, only the property of the institutions who had treated him with such indifference over the years. Lessons and legacy. In the wake of the event, and for many years afterwards, it's been debated if Marvin Heemeyer is a reprehensible madman or a man pushed to the end of his tether who simply wanted to bring a cost to those who wronged him. The local government showed little interest in his attempts to build a better life for himself and pursuing the American dream. They prioritized big business over helping an upstanding member of the community, going so far as to slaughter the man's reputation to stop him making well-deserved progress. This lack of empathy and unwillingness to compromise ultimately brought the man to the edge of reason and made him into a ticking time bomb.
For the most part, turned me into a desperate man. And desperate men do desperate things.
Afterwards, the nature of the attack and the lack of casualties made Heemeyer a lot more relatable to the average working family. As such, as time went on, he has become somewhat of a folk hero. He's often seen as a man who gave as good as he got in the end, with many seeing his final act as actually pretty justifiable. On the flip side, there were those too who would say that he was a criminal, caused untold suffering, and attempted to shoot passerbys. Regardless of your opinion on the man himself, though, it is clear that this event was completely avoidable. Without petty rivalry and an honest man being denied the opportunity to better his life, this tragic story could have been avoided. On an individual level, Marvin Heemeyer could have been saved if his support network had been more substantial. The lack of a family and the isolationist lifestyle he took up in his final 18 months meant he had little support.
I didn't have a wife, I didn't have family, but God built me that way for a reason.
The tragedy of this story is that with a simple phone call, checkup, or sincere conversation starting with, "Hey Marvin, how are you?" or perhaps a small submission from the local authorities, in those dark times may have gone a long way to preventing millions in damage and a seemingly enjoyable man taking his own life.
For the people that are out there that hear this, that can stand listening to it, please pray for me, pray for my soul. I believe that I'm doing the right thing.